My name is Stacie Adams and my partner's name is Joyce Kelly. For this presentation, we chose dual relationships and boundary issues. So, boundary crossings and boundary violations are basically any deviation from traditional, strict, only in the office, or emotionally distant forms of therapy, or any deviation from rigid risk management protocols. Boundary violations occur when therapists cross the line of decency and violate or exploit their clients. Boundary crossing often involves clinically effective interventions such as self-disclosure, home visits, non-sexual touch, gifts, or bartering. Dual relationships or multiple relationships in psychotherapy refers to any situation where multiple roles exist between the therapist and the client. Examples of a dual relationship are when a client is also a student, a friend, family member, employee, or business associate of the therapist. So, this presentation assumes that there is nothing romantic or sexual involved in a dual relationship discussed and that no one is being exploited in any way. Obviously, these factors would make the relationship explicitly unethical, according to most standards and also the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. Our discussion relates to many gray areas of dual relationships that are common to social work practice, which have the potential to create ethical dilemmas and conflicts. When I think about dual relationships and boundary issues, I always refer to a movie called What About Bob? It was made in, I think, 1991. It was one of my aunt's favorite movies. And it was about a therapist who goes on vacation and his client Bob follows him. And Bob gets along with the whole family and everybody is great. Bob is great. The only person who has an issue is the therapist, because he realizes that, Bob has these severe boundary issues. And along with many other issues that he was diagnosed with. And towards the end, the psychiatrist is the one who goes crazy and ends up in a psychiatric hospital. But it's a humorous spin on boundary issues. So if you have time, I would suggest that you look at What About Bob? So, talking about how to define a former client. Another issue common to social workers is allowing a non-professional relationship of any kind to develop after the professional relationship has ended. How do we ethically define former clients? Some important points to remember are: what are the emotional implications and sensitive nature of the previous professional relationship? How much privacy does the situation call for? Is this something where you're going to church together? Are you guys visiting each other's homes? How long-term was the treatment or professional contact? For example, certainly a social worker who drives a client to a couple appointments before termination of the relationship has a different consideration than the social worker who is a therapist to the client for 10 years. So that's important to look at as well. Also, there are 3 basic perspectives according to Madison, Jarretton, and Croxton. Once a client, always a client is always the appropriate definition when it comes to sexual relationships. After a designated time period, the client becomes a former client. And as soon as the professional relationship ends, the client is a former client. This should assume that there's a sort of contract between social workers and clients that is understood by both social worker and client to be officially terminated. I know when I used to work at the halfway house, when I was working with men coming from incarceration, I had an ex-employee actually marry one of her clients. But with the DC jail, they said that after 6 years, no longer being a client, it's okay to have that relationship. Certainly, I would never do something like that. But there are different guidelines and different standards where different people work. So that's important to remember as well. So non-sexual dual relationships. According to DeJulio and Berkman, many respondents in their study have participated in non-sexual multiple role relationships with subordinates, although less often with current clients and students than with former clients, supervisees, and employees. This suggests that these multiple role relationships are very common, despite the impressions we might have as social workers just entering the professional scene. Clearly, the longer one has been working and the closer knit the community worked in, the more likely these relationships will become an issue. Should the open-minded, accepting, compassionate, and caring quality of social work extend to allowing positive, non-sexual relationships with former clients, employees, supervisors, and supervisees? This is a question that must be addressed on an individual basis using one's personal values and ethical decision models. It could be argued that any relationship where there was formerly a power dynamic or transference potential should be considered off limits for a dual relationship, since emotional exploitation may occur no matter how careful the parties or how unintentional the damage. It is important to note that the APA, Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, American Counseling Association, and National NASW specifically prohibit non-sexual multiple role relationships in their code of ethics. So, managing dual relationships and boundaries. When unavoidable or possibly even advantageous, dual relationships can be managed using some common sense strategies. Reamer offers a great summary of the issue. Boundary issues involve circumstances in which social workers encounter actual or potential conflicts between their professional duties and their social, sexual, religious, or business relationships. Some important concepts to consider when encountering and analyzing the potential harm or of a dual relationship include distinguishing between harmless boundary crossings and boundary violations, which are exploitative, such as sexual contact. Unsure undue influence is not involved. Undue influence is using pressure or authority to influence a client in any way that benefits the social worker. Determine which of the following factors are at play. Intimate relationships, A. Pursuit of personal benefit, B. Emotional independency needs, C. Altruistic gestures or responses to unanticipated circumstances. Be sensitive about accepting or giving gifts that could be misinterpreted as more than innocently friendly. I remember when I was working at Pathways, I had a client who was very hypersexual, very flirtatious with me, and she offered me something. It wasn't anything big, but I didn't take it because I didn't want to give her the wrong picture. But then I had another client who I was helping. I had a great relationship with, but I didn't think much of it, and I took a gift from her. So just knowing your clients and knowing how they'll react and knowing how they, respond to you is important as well, because I knew if I took the gift from the client who's flirtatious, I knew that she would get the wrong idea, and I wanted to make sure that I set clear, concise boundaries so she knew the situation. Also, follow a risk management protocol such as the following. Be alert to potential or actual conflicts of interest. Inform clients or colleagues about potential or actual conflicts of interest and explore reasonable solutions. Consult colleagues, supervisors, professional literature, regulations, policies, and ethical standards to identify boundary issues and construct solutions. Design a plan of action that addresses the boundary issues and protects all parties involved. Document all steps taken to address boundary issues. Develop a strategy to monitor the implementation of this risk management protocol. And it's also important to add about the modern age of social media. Social media platforms such as Facebook are creating numerous novel and unique challenges pertaining to dual relationships. I have another story where I actually had 2 clients who requested me on Facebook, and it was kind of weird because I was taking one of my clients to a doctor appointment, and she said, "Hey, I saw you in your uniform." And I said, "You saw me?" I said, "You saw me where?" She said, "I saw you online." I said, "Huh?" I was like, "I have a private page." But for some reason, she was able to see my information, and that really bothered me. And so she even requested me, and I had another male client request me. And so I had to change basically the settings on my Facebook page because I didn't know it was so open. So Reamer provides just a few examples of the dicey situations created by Facebook for social workers and clients. Social workers posting unethical and derogatory comments about one another. Social worker discovers the client is visiting his wife's Facebook page and that in the past they have been lovers. And a social worker being Facebook stalked by a client based on information posted that she had assumed was private, which was my case. The lesson to be learned from all of these scenarios is that professionals, we must always assume what we post will somehow be leaked and take precautions to make sure all content is ethical and suitable for public viewing. If we are unsure at all whether we have our privacy settings configured correctly, we must be even more vigilant to prevent information or photographs being available to the wrong person. So that is all for our presentation for dual relationships and boundaries. I hope you were able to understand where we were coming from. Joyce Kelly was the brains behind this operation, and I was basically the face, the forefront. So we want to thank you for watching our video, and if you have any questions, please feel free to post them under the discussion. Have a great night.